The far right are on the rise in Britain, and they're being fueled by a right-wing media which is radicalising people in this country. Now, I'm just standing here in Trafalgar Square, where a few days ago, Tommy Robinson fans staged something between a temper tantrum and a riot. Now, some of them were doing Nazi salutes and the lot, and you know, they were big, tough guys. Not quite so tough when they got arrested.
Tell me what
Oh, officer! Now, Tommy Robinson isn't a political prisoner. He's not a martyr to free speech. He's a fraudster, because one of his many convictions is for mortgage fraud, as well as using someone's passport as his own, as well as assault. And this time round, he had a suspended sentence for contempt of court. And the whole point of contempt of court, just so we're clear, is to stop court trials collapsing. Because if anything is seen to impugn justice, that people aren't getting a fair trial, then the entire trial can collapse. And either people who really should be in prison end up on the streets again, or you have to rerun the trial all over again and get victims to come forward all over again to talk about their traumatic experiences, and the taxpayer has to shell out all this money. He was warned what would happen if he did the same thing. He did the same thing again. He ended up in prison, as he was told would happen. You can't mess about with court trials. The truth is, though, there is an ascendant far right in this country. We had the murder, the neo-Nazi murder of Joe Cox by a terrorist who would give his name as Death to Traitors, Freedom for Britain. We had another terrorist attack which was targeting worshippers at a mosque, but where the terrorist said he wanted to come to London to murder Jeremy Corbyn and Sadiq Khan if he could. We've had this week a neo-Nazi activist plead guilty in another plot to murder the Labour MP Rosie Cooper. We've had the Conservative MP, Anna Soubry, say
at least one honourable member on these benches will today and tomorrow not vote in accordance with their conscience because of threats to their personal safety.
And of how a fellow anti-hard Brexit MP had to have armed guards to protect them. Is this what you want in your democracy? The front page of the Daily Express this week was "Ignore the will of the people at your peril." Doesn't really get much more menacing than that as a front page of a national newspaper, does it? And the Sun's front page was "Great Britain or Great Betrayal." Think about this language and discourse and what it's doing. Legitimising this idea that you're not just wrong politically, but you're a traitor. Traitors, saboteurs, enemies of the people. This is how dissidents and critics are spoken about in this Tory Britain. And it should frighten all of us, because what it's doing is legitimising the traditional discourse of the far right, of betrayal, of being stabbed in the back. And that is going to fuel radicalisation, and is fueling radicalisation on the streets of this country. Do you know what the irony is? The far right, all these thugs and football hooligans who present themselves as the voice of the man on the street, these people pretend that they're somehow taking on the mainstream media. They're challenging them. But they are partly the bastard creation of them. The mainstream media constantly demonises Muslims, immigrants, refugees, presenting them as responsible for crimes and injustices committed by the powerful. And it's one of the reasons, according to polling, people think there are far more Muslims in this country than there actually is. They think there are far more immigrants than there actually are. They think that immigrants and refugees are treated with far more generosity, infinitely more generosity than they actually are. And the far right then feed on that. It fuels them. The myths, the lies, and that's how they have this symbiotic relationship. Tommy Robinson and the likes aren't taking on the mainstream media, they are partly the product of the mainstream media. The far right is on the march, and they are using social media from YouTube to Facebook, often on Twitter, in a way which is helping to radicalise people with myths and lies. Just as we know with fundamentalist Islamism, social media, the online sphere, has played a big role in radicalising people there. And that is something which we've got to confront head on, particularly young, angry white men, some of whom don't feel that they have a future, they feel under siege, and many of them have every reason to be frustrated and pissed off about the way this country's run, but they're encouraged to take that anger out on all the wrong targets.
How can you look in the mirror anymore?
But the left has to be aware of this growing danger, because as Brexit carries on going badly, as the Tories continue to bungle the deal that we're going to have to strike with the European Union, now this country's voted to leave, that when it's seen to all go wrong and one big betrayal, that's when the far right will pounce. We've got to take action urgently. We've got to mobilise on the streets. Whenever the far right take to the streets, we have to be there with our own mobilisations, with our own message of, instead of hatred, of solidarity, of unity instead. We've got to take the fight online, across social media, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, to challenge that narrative. We've got to go into working class communities where there is often that sense of alienation and frustration and despair about how this country's run. Probably some of you are going to be, well, I know this for a fact, you're going to be Tommy Robinson supporters and fans. Can you just answer in the comments box why you think somebody with a long history of criminal activity is allowed to be above the law, to commit contempt of court, when any other actual genuine reporter and journalist would have been banged up just as he was? I want to hear your thoughts. What do we do about it? How do we win them over? We've got loads of videos. I want to do a special plug, by the way, for my colleague John Domokos, who's done a brilliant documentary called Our House, which is about a hostel in Liverpool. Please click on that and check it out. We've got many other videos. We've got loads of interviews coming up. As ever, subscribe. I'll see you next time.